morning. You're watching News 9 Live. I'm Karthik Malhotra. The Indian stock markets are closed today on account of Mahashivratri. Wishing all our viewers a happy Shivratri. But first up, let's look at the global headlines in news. US President Donald Trump opens new trade battle order probe into copper imports over national security concerns. US and Ukraine finalize draft minerals deal as Trump pushes for rapid end to war with Russia. US Security Council adopts US drafted resolution taking neutral stance on Ukraine war as Trump seeks to broker peace. Wall Street struggles as S&P 500 and Nasdaq hit one-month lows amid weak consumer confidence. Nvidia earnings remain in focus. US consumer confidence sees sharpest decline in 3.5 years as inflation expectations surge amid tariff concerns and economic uncertainty. Tesla sales plunge 45% in Europe as EV demand surges. Changes in Model Y production takes place and Musk's political stance sparks controversy in the EV market in Europe. And overall, European car sales drop in the month of Jan as petrol and diesel demand weakens. Automakers push EVs while bracing for US tariffs and EU's emission fines. Meanwhile, Japan's Nippon Steel seeks to revise US steel deal. ICE talks with Trump administration after Biden blocked bid over national security concerns. And Britain will boost its defense spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2027 and eyes a 3% long-time target as Prime Minister Keir Starmer cuts aid budget ahead of talks with Donald Trump tomorrow. It's another day and it's another trade tariff concern looming. US President Donald Trump has opened a fresh front in his push for economic nationalism, this time targeting copper. Trump signed an order directing a national security probe into copper imports, a move that could pave the way for new tariffs. Now, according to his administration, China is maneuvering to dominate the global copper market, putting US supply chains at risk. The probe, led by Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, falls under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, the same law Trump used in his final term to slap tariffs on steel and aluminum. Listen in.
Like our steel and aluminum industries, our great American copper industry has been decimated by global actors attacking our domestic production. To build back our copper industry, I've requested my Secretary of Commerce and USTR to study copper imports and end unfair trade, putting Americans out of work. Tariffs will help rebuild back our American copper industry and strengthen our national defense. American industries depend on copper, and they should be made in America. No exemptions, no exceptions. America first creates American jobs and protects our national security. It's time for copper to come home.
Time for copper to come home and make copper in America again seems to be the sentiment. But talking about metals and minerals, a major agreement is in the works between the US and Ukraine as both nations have finalized the terms of a draft minerals deal, part of US President Donald Trump's push to end Ukraine's war with Russia. While details still remain unclear, the agreement is expected to boost Ukraine's critical mineral sector, reducing reliance on Russian resources. So the big question remains, will it help pave the way for peace? This report tells you all about it.
The U.S. and Ukraine have agreed on the terms of a draft minerals deal central to Kyiv's push to win Washington's support as President Donald Trump seeks to rapidly end the war with Russia. That's according to two sources who spoke with Reuters. Trump indicated Tuesday he would meet with Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky later this week to finalize the agreement, which could open up the country's vast mineral wealth to the U.S.
I hear that he's coming on Friday. Certainly it's okay with me if he'd like to, and he would like to sign it together with me, and I understand that's a big deal.
Trump also said there needs to be some form of peacekeeping troops in Ukraine if an agreement to end the conflict is struck. Moscow has refused to accept any deployment of NATO troops. Trump's rush to impose an end to Russia's war in Ukraine has stoked fears of far-reaching U.S. concessions to Russian President Vladimir Putin that could undermine security in Ukraine and Europe and alter the geopolitical landscape.
So even as Zelensky is all scheduled to meet Trump on Friday, what exactly are these rare earth minerals and what are they used for? And what's at stake for the US and its allies? This report tells you all about Zelensky and Ukraine's mineral reserves. Take a look.
US President Donald Trump has said he wants Ukraine to supply the US with rare earth minerals as a form of payment for financially supporting the country's war efforts against Russia.
So we're looking to do a deal with Ukraine where they're going to secure what we're giving them with their rare earth and other things.
Here is what we know about the critical minerals in Ukraine that could be of interest to the US and other partners. Rare earths such as nickel and lithium are a group of 17 metals deemed critical to the production of batteries and other components used in electric vehicles, cell phones, missile systems and other electronics. And there are no viable substitutes. Here's geographer Julie Michelle Klinger.
They're often described as the vitamins or the spice of industry because they have, over the past several decades, they've enabled, through advances in material science, our technologies to get smaller and faster and stronger and more resilient.
The US Geological Survey considers 50 minerals to be critical, including rare earths. They are essential for industries such as defence, high-tech appliances, aerospace and green energy. According to Ukraine's Institute of Geology, the country possesses a significant deposit of rare earths, including lanthanum and cerium, used in TVs and lighting, neodymium, used in wind turbines and EV batteries, and erbium and yttrium, whose applications range from nuclear power to lasers. The state's geological service said Ukraine has one of Europe's largest confirmed reserves of lithium, vital for batteries, ceramics and glass. It also possesses 1/5 of the globe's reserves of graphite, a key component in electric vehicle batteries and nuclear reactors. So why does Trump want them? Political scientist Jakob Kulik said there are several reasons.
Trump wants rare earths because the American economy is highly dependent on Chinese sources and it's an economic and national security risk. And in order to avoid that the Chinese will take over Ukrainian rare earths commodities and build up potential mines there, it's an option for the Americans.
Kulik added that not many American companies are able to mine and produce rare earths within the US. Ukrainian data shows that the country has deposits of 22 of the 34 minerals identified by the EU as critical. However, about 40% of Ukraine's metal resources are now under Russian occupation, according to estimates by Ukrainian think tanks. The bulk of Ukraine's coal deposits, which powered its steel industry before the war, have been lost.
And staying with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, a major move at the United Nations on the 3rd anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as the UN Security Council has adopted the the US drafted resolution that takes a neutral stance on the conflict. But with global division still deep, will this resolution pave the way for peace or simply buy more time? Take a look.
The United Nations Security Council adopted a resolution that takes a neutral stance on war in Ukraine on Monday, one that was drafted by the US. It came on the 3rd anniversary of Russia's invasion and reflects US President Donald Trump's upending of US policy on Ukraine, as well as his more conciliatory approach towards Russia compared to his predecessor, Joe Biden. Until now, the 15-member UN Security Council had been deadlocked throughout the war and unable to take any action because Russia holds a veto. However, the UN General Assembly, with its wider membership of 193, has repeatedly supported Ukraine. And earlier on Monday, the US had failed to convince the General Assembly to pass its more neutral resolution. Instead, the Assembly passed two other resolutions. one drafted by Ukraine and European countries, and another drafted by the US, with language supporting Ukraine that Europeans added in. And while General Assembly resolutions are not binding, unlike those from the Security Council, the Assembly carries political weight, reflecting a global view on the war. Ahead of the vote, Ukraine's Deputy Foreign Minister, Mariana Betsa, told the Assembly her country is not only fighting for its own independence.
This war has never been about Ukraine only. It is about a fundamental right of any nation to exist, to choose its own path, and to live free from aggression.
Later, the Security Council adopted the US resolution with 10 votes in favour, while France, Britain, Denmark, Greece and Slovenia abstained. Russia voted in favour after failing to amend the US text to include a reference to the root causes of the conflict, and vetoing European bids to add language supporting Ukraine. After the Council's vote, acting US Ambassador to the UN, Dorothy Shea, said the resolution paves the way for peace.
It is a first step, but a crucial one of which we should all be proud. Now we must use it to build a peaceful future for Ukraine, Russia, and the international community.
But Trump's approach to mediation has left Ukraine and European allies wary of his focus on Russia and worried they could be cut out of talks to end the war.
Tuesday was a rough day on Wall Street as US stocks struggled with the S&P 500 and Nasdaq hitting one-month lows. Moreover, disappointing consumer confidence report highlighted growing economic uncertainties adding pressure to the markets. More details in this report.
U.S. stocks struggled on Tuesday, with the S&P 500 and Nasdaq touching one-month lows and notching their fourth consecutive down sessions. The Dow closed modestly higher. The latest consumer confidence report showed Americans are growing more anxious about the potential negative effects of President Trump's policies on the economy. Meanwhile, investors braced for fourth-quarter earnings from Nvidia due after Wednesday's close. Shares of the AI chip leader on Tuesday pulled back nearly 3%. Shayna Orsic-Sizzle is founder and CEO of Bonrian Capital Management.
I think that until we kind of have a better idea of where they stand and what their outlook is, what has come out from other Mag 7 companies, whether it be Microsoft or Amazon or Alphabet, hasn't been overly positive. So the market's waiting on bated breath to see what happens. And then some of the comments coming out of, the Treasury Secretary and the Fed give people pause with the economic data maybe not being as good as they expected. So all of these things, I think, are causing investors to get a little uncomfortable with where the market is today.
Among other movers, Bitcoin weakness weighed on crypto stocks. Coinbase dropped 6.4%, and MicroStrategy shed 11.4%. Zoom Communications slid 8.5% following a disappointing annual revenue forecast. And U.S.-listed shares of Li Auto jumped 13.2% after the Chinese company unveiled its first electric SUV.
And it's not just Wall Street. U.S. consumer confidence also took a sharp hit in the month of February, marking its steepest decline in 3.5 years. The drop comes as concerns mount over rising inflation, with 12-month expectations surging. More details in this report.
U.S. consumer confidence fell at its sharpest pace in 3.5 years in February, while inflation expectations surged. That's according to a report from the Conference Board, which indicated Americans were growing more anxious about the potential negative impact of President Donald Trump's policies on the economy. A senior economist with the Conference Board said that comments on the current administration and its policies dominated the responses to the latest survey. And there was a sharp increase in mentions of tariffs and trade, back to a level unseen since 2019. Other economists said unprecedented layoffs of federal government workers were also taking a toll on consumers' psyche, which they said posed a risk to spending, the main engine of the U.S. economy. Consumer confidence fell for the third straight month, while average inflation expectations over the next year jumped to 6% from 5.2%. Though economists are not yet predicting a recession, they expect a long period of very slow economic growth and high inflation, That would put the Federal Reserve in a difficult spot. The U.S. Central Bank paused cutting interest rates in January, while policymakers monitored the economic impact of the Trump administration's policies.
Meanwhile, Tesla's European sales have taken a massive beating in the month of Jan, plunging as much as 45% compared to the same period last year, even as demand for electric vehicles surged across the European region. According to industry data, Tesla registered just under 10,000 cars last month, while overall EV sales have jumped 37%. Now, this decline comes following the company making changes in its production lines for its popular Model Y SUV and facing growing scrutiny over CEO Elon Musk's political stance. Musk has recently backed far-right parties in Europe and openly criticized leaders in Germany as well as the UK. His support for Donald Trump and attacks on Ukraine's President Zelensky have also drawn controversy. Tesla's sales in Germany fell to their lowest since 2021, while France saw a 63% drop, its worst performance in over a year. Meanwhile, rival automakers are gaining ground, capitalizing on Europe's growing EV market. And like we told you, sales of fully electric cars in Europe are up 37.3% in the month of Jan, although the sharp rise was not nearly enough to compensate for the drop in petrol and diesel engine vehicles, leaving overall sales in Europe down by 2.1%. Now, industry data shows that while all-electric brand Tesla saw a 45.2% drop in the European Union, Britain and the European Free Trade Area, sales at its Chinese competitors SAIC Motor, which owns the MG brand, were indeed up as high as 36.8%. More in this report.
New car sales in Europe were down by over 2% in January. A jump in fully electric and hybrid electric car registrations in main markets was not enough to compensate for falling petrol and diesel sales. Industry data showed on Tuesday that overall sales in France, Italy, Germany and Britain were all down from last year. Only Spain recorded year-on-year increase among top-selling nations. The EU executive will present auto sector plans at the beginning of March, following talks with automakers, unions and interest groups. Car makers are struggling to compete with Chinese rivals and are bracing for US tariffs. They've urged the Commission to grant relief from potential fines resulting from CO2 car emission targets that came into effect in January. Some automakers have increased the prices of petrol engine models to encourage EV adoption, but the industry fears customers will simply buy fewer cars. January sales in the EU, Britain and the European Free Trade Area fell slightly below 1 million cars sold, the lowest volume since August. Registrations at Volkswagen and Renault grew by 5.3% and 5.4% respectively, while they fell by 16% at Stellantis. In the EU, sales fell by 2.6%, even as the registrations of battery electric and hybrid electric cars grew by 34 and 18.4% respectively. US President Donald Trump has raised tariffs on aluminium and steel and threatened a 25% tariff on imports from Mexico and Canada, as well as on all autos and semiconductors.
All right. Nippon Steel, Japan's steel maker, is set to use its current merger agreement with the US Steel as a foundational basis for upcoming discussions with the US government. Remember, earlier this month, US President Donald Trump, alongside Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba at the Oval Office, said that Nippon Steel's $14.9 billion bid for US Steel would take the form of an investment instead of an outright purchase. Take a look.
Japan's Nippon Steel has a plan to get talks going with the US government. Company President Tadashi Imai said Tuesday his firm could use its current merger agreement to buy US Steel as a starting point for discussions as it tries to revive the deal. Earlier this month, US President Donald Trump said Nippon's bid for US Steel would take the form of an investment instead of a purchase. He made the announcement alongside Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba at the Oval Office. Trump also said he wouldn't mind if Nippon took a minority stake in US Steel. The bid was previously blocked by former President Joe Biden. Imai said the current merger agreement will serve as a starting point for discussions with the US government. He added the firm will talk with the US government ahead of how it can get Trump's approval. Nippon is the world's fourth biggest steelmaker and bid for US Steel in December 2023. It promised billions of dollars in investment to revamp its aging infrastructure. The company also pledged to keep its headquarters in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The deal faced political headwinds from the start as both Trump and Biden vowed to stop the deal. The Biden administration ultimately halted it over national security concerns. In January, the steelmakers asked the courts to reject the bloc.
Veteran investor Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway has reported a third consecutive record annual operating profit on Saturday. The growth was driven by substantial underwriting earnings and investment income within its insurance business. Now, operating profit for 2024 increased by 27%, reaching a whopping $47.4 billion compared to about $37.3 billion the previous year. More in this report.
The boss is going strong at 94 years old, and investment titan Berkshire Hathaway appears to be in rude health too. Shares in Warren Buffett's firm hit all-time highs on Monday after it reported record earnings. Fourth quarter profit from its 189 operating businesses jumped 71% to over $14.5 billion. Berkshire stock jumped around 4% to record levels following the news. Buffett singled out car insurer Geico as one of his star performers. In his annual newsletter to shareholders, he praised the firm for cutting costs and exceeding his expectations. Berkshire's cash pile also doubled over last year, in large part as it reduced its stake in Apple, though the iPhone maker remains its largest common stock holding. Buffett said Berkshire paid $26.8 billion in federal taxes over the year, or more than $3 million per hour. He cautioned Washington to spend the money wisely. The Buffett effect then rippled through Asian markets on Tuesday. Shares in Japan's trading houses jumped after he said Berkshire would probably increase its stake in them. Mitsubishi Corp soared about 8.5% in early trade, with Itochu and others not far behind. Now Buffett is thinking about his succession. He wrote that it wouldn't be long before Vice Chairman Greg Abel replaces him as chief executive and starts writing the famous annual letters.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has said his country will raise defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2027 and target 3% of the GDP in the longer term by cutting its overseas development budget. The shift in Britain's defence strategy comes as Starmer is all set to fly to the United States to meet US President Donald Trump on Thursday, who has repeatedly called for NATO members like Britain to spend more on defence. More details in this report.
So starting today, I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. Yeah. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so that we reach that level in 2027. Yeah. And we will maintain that for the rest of this Parliament. And let me spell that out, Mr. Speaker. That means spending £13.4 billion more on defence every year from 2027. But, Mr. Speaker, in the short term, it can only be funded through hard choices. And in this case, that means we will cut our spending on development assistance, moving from 0.5% of GNI today to 0.3% in 2027. Fully funding our increased investment in defence.
Keir Starmer there. Meanwhile, Unilever has pushed out its chief executive officer, Hein Schumacher, after less than 2 years, signaling that the board was not satisfied with the pace of restructuring at the fast-moving consumer goods giant. Schumacher has been replaced by the chief financial officer, Fernando Fernandes, as the new CEO. The Anglo-Dutch FMCG major hailed Fernandes's ability to drive change at speed, hinting that the board seeks a faster transformation. More in this report.
Unilever's chief executive Hein Schumacher will step down after less than 2 years in the job. The The Ben & Jerry's and Dove soap owner made the surprise announcement Tuesday. His departure comes just weeks after the firm announced underwhelming full-year earnings. Schumacher had reset the group's strategy to address years of underperformance. He also laid out cost cuts last year, including separating its ice cream division and cutting thousands of jobs. The consumer goods giant faces pressure from investors to revive its fortunes. Unilever chairman Ian Meakins said the board was pleased with the company's performance last year, but has much further to go to deliver best-in-class results. Schumacher is due to be replaced by finance chief Fernando Fernandez. Meakins said the board was impressed by Fernandez's decisive and results-oriented approach. Unilever, which also owns Magnum and Hellmann's Mayonnaise, made no change to this year's outlook, and the board said it was committed to further accelerating Schumacher's growth plan. Schumacher will step down in March and leave the company on May 31st. Unilever said he is leaving by mutual agreement. The CEO's surprise departure hit Unilever's shares, which fell 2% on Tuesday. They had gained more than 9% since Schumacher took over.
And finally, shifting focus to India, young Indians are said to be dabbling in crypto trading to supplement their regular income as jobs and pay increases have lagged the world, beating economic growth. Well, that's according to a report. Now, trading volume on cryptocurrencies on 4 of India's largest exchanges grew more than twofold quarter on quarter to $1.9 billion in the October to December quarter, according to data from aggregator CoinGecko. Overall, India's crypto market is expected to grow to more than $15 billion in 2035 from about $2.5 billion last year at a compound annual growth rate of 18.5%. We leave you with that report.
Engineer Sagar Neware never used to pay much attention to things like Bitcoin. Now he says trading cryptocurrencies is taking over his life. The 25-year-old Indian says he spends his nights monitoring prices since crypto markets never shut. And he's far from unusual. As job creation and incomes lag growth in the country, more young Indians are turning to crypto to supplement their money. Trading of Bitcoin and other tokens on India's 4 main exchanges rose more than twofold over the October to December quarter. That's according to data from CoinGecko. Most of the gains have been driven by retail investors in smaller towns. Here in the western city of Nagpur, these young people have signed up for classes to hone their trading skills. Academy owner Yash Jaiswal says it's about topping up low incomes, not getting rich quick.
The job which we are doing have a very low pay scale. So one who is working under a certain pay scale would want to definitely support his family. Nobody wants to drive a BMW, trust me. The major of the people, they just want a small car. They just want a happy life.
Many experts warn that crypto markets remain very volatile and a risky place to park your cash. But that doesn't deter students like Ashish Nagose.
Indian market mein jaise ki
he says he already has a business selling flowers and can trade crypto as a sideline. Now India's cryptocurrency market is forecast to grow to over $15 billion by 2035, or about 6 times last year's figure. But the country's budding traders will have to navigate some complications. India levies high taxes on crypto trading gains and has set no new rules for the market, nor folded it under existing securities laws. Meanwhile, the country's central bank is still a strong skeptic about the whole idea. If that creates uncertainty, none of it seems to put off India's new generation of crypto fans.
मैं और आप एक जैसे ही तो हैं। एक बार मंजिल दिख जाए One shot of a century. तो उसे पाने के लिए हम अपने कदमों को नहीं रोकते। That looks out. पर कभी-कभी मेहनत और मंजिल के बीच रह जाता है एक फासला। खैर, मुझे उस फासले को मिटाने के लिए थोड़ी और मेहनत लगेगी, पर शुक्र है आपके पास है टाटा कैपिटल, जो मिटाए फासले आपकी मेहनत